we're going to start with the working group forecast. I'm going to go ahead and want to introduce quickly who's part of this group. So we've had several members, kind of a core team that has gotten together since April. They really is quite inspiring because they all come from different backgrounds. We've got Gary that comes from the government. We've got Alison that's coming from banks. We've got Amanda that does a lot of consulting in this area. And so what they've been able to do is come together and discuss their different techniques and put together a survey out to the community, which I'll get to in a minute. But I want to hand it over to Alison McIntyre from Lloyds Bank to share what the working group put together as a proposal that was approved then by the TAC and the F2 staff to move forward with.
Thanks, Ashley.
Hi, Alison.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alison McIntyre. I'm the working group lead for the forecasting working group. I was really pleased when Kevin put up that block view from the state of FinOps, and those that were paying attention to it would have seen that the second largest at 29% was accurate forecasting. And that's kind of what kicked off our need for, or our perceived need for, a working group. Our goal, our aim, what we're all about is creating collateral that we aspire that would help everybody, whether you're even at run state or you're at pre-crawl. At every step along the way, we hope to have at least a nugget that might be helpful, might help you avoid a pitfall or get there faster. This will likely come in the form of a playbook. We're about to go into sprint 3. We're just closing out sprint 2, which was all about reviewing the survey. Ashley's going to go through that in a bit of detail, and we've got a few slides on that to let you see what the responses look like. So there's some quite interesting ones in there. But that's kind of our main aim, to get collateral out into the hands of the community that's useful. We'll go on to the next one.
I think just to kind of start out, we talk about forecasting. What we started realizing is there's a lot of different types of forecasting. So we thought it'd be good to kind of level set with the community what we're finding here. So FinOps teams are really being asked to engage very early on and when business cases are being created. This could be reviewing a first-time estimate for something that's going to be cloud native. This could be a large bulk data center migration. We're seeing that FinOps teams are being embedded very early on in those discussions. Another common forecasting is annual planning. It's probably the one we're the most familiar with. This really sets the tone for budgets. And so we've been discovering through conversations and surveys that this is important to get right and understand the impact that doing forecasts sets the whole company up for the budget. This also tends to be a big consolidated effort with finance. We learned that a lot of practitioners are also doing reforecasting. They're either doing that because it aligns with financial planning cycles where they're being asked, that's great that you gave me annually, but I need a quarterly one. I need I need one middle of the year as well. What I found is interesting is people are actually taking this reforecasting on proactively and saying, I want to do this because I'm seeing trends that don't seem right. I'm seeing things go over. I'm seeing things significantly under. I'm going to trigger our reforecast and figure out what's going on. I find that super fascinating. And lastly, FinOps teams have been heavily involved in the long-term commitment planning, which really looks like a combination of all of this. So it's reforecasting, bringing in new business cases, bringing in the annual and being able to project it 3, 4, 5 years out so you can do those long-term commitments with your vendors. Please let us know if there's other types that we've missed, but I think this was kind of just a fascinating output that we really need to say, what are you talking about when you say forecasting? Because there's many different types. So let's dive a little bit more into this. So this working group worked together to put 14 excellent questions together, and they pushed that survey out to the community, and we received about 49 responses. And the goal was just to take what we already knew from the State of FinOps survey and dive a little bit deeper into that. And we wanted to look at it through the lens of maturity. And so the group also defined these 4 levels of maturity while they did this. I'm going to hand it back over to Kate, Amanda, and Allison so they can go through these results with you all. Kick us off, Kate.
Thank you, Ashley. So Ashley outlined what the different types of forecasts are, but I want to talk about why people do forecasts. So we put in 3 options in the survey where people could choose 1 or 3 or enter their own option in an other text box. And really the key highlights here are that the most popular reasons are because it's part of the budget process or to provide those numbers at the organizational level. And that was really popular with the crawl and pre-crawl. So if you're just starting out, one takeaway would be maybe that's the place to start. Try to tie your forecast to the budget because everyone cares about their budget. Another interesting takeaway that I had here after looking at the data is that the runners actually responded, they selected each of the three options, and most of them often had other reasons why they were doing a forecast. So as you mature through your FinOps evolution, all of these will most likely become a reason for doing a forecast at some point. I'll turn it over to Amanda now.
All right, so this slide looks at the time period of the forecast by maturity. And so first and foremost, it's really unsurprising to see the majority fall into that 1 year period, as that follows the typical fiscal or calendar year model for organizations. But I do want to point out the widespread of periods for all of our maturities, because I think this is indicative that regardless of maturity, folks are going to forecast what works for their organizations and industries. And lastly, I do just want to point out those 3 year and 5 years, because I find those really really interesting, because I do think it requires a little bit of extra finagling when you're putting something together that far in advance. So those 3 year responses are most likely some folks who have enterprise agreements. And if I had to guess, that 5 year response is probably from our public sector, where they're required to do that 5 year forecasting and budgeting in advance. But bottom line, key takeaway, I think, is do what makes sense for your organization in this area. And then moving on to our next one, I think, yep, we've got that forecasting accuracy compared to actuals. So this is really interesting because you can actually see a wide spread of maturity across those three variances. So traditionally, one of the key forecasting maturity metrics has been variance. But here we've got our runners and walkers and crawlers spreading across almost all three. So there's a couple reasons, I think, for this. One being, despite the variance, it's because their spend might be smaller, so they're not as concerned if the variance is larger. Or probably also an option can be that they're doing a different metric or threshold, such as revenue. So maybe if you have a 20% variance or higher, you're not concerned with it because you have the matching revenue or widget purchase to go along with that, or lack thereof. So I think this is really interesting, and I would love to get more folks to take the survey so we can even dive into this data point a little bit more, since we see this widespread of variance across the maturity. Over to you, Alison.
Thank you. So this was one of our other key things. At what level do you, or the granularity, do you forecast at? You know, are you just saying, for Azure, we're planning on spending X? Or are you saying, within my business area, I'm planning on spending Y? Or do you actually go down to the account or the project or the subscription level? It's another one of horses for courses. And the phrase I hate, it depends. It does depend on what your organization needs from you. But what I would say is you would have to repeat from scratch if you decide to go down to a lower level. So this is one of the areas that it's worthwhile putting the thought in what you might want, because you can roll these up. If you do them at the account, the subscription level, you can create your business units out of those. That's easy. Even if you only ever report on those, if you ever need to go lower, it's easy. But if you only start at the higher level, you'd actually have to do the whole reforecast process. So this is one that's worth thinking about in advance, because evolving on from it is actually retracing your steps. But you'll see the mix. But generally, as you evolve, you will go into more level of granularity, because then that gives you the opportunity to do all of them. Can you take me on to the next one, please? And then the final one we're sharing with you today is about how often you actually run your forecast cycle or your process. How often are you updating them? We spoke about what period you were forecasting for, but then, you know, we see people who they do their forecast for a year or 3 years, and they do it once a year. That's not great. You'll see here that in the run state, they're doing it at least monthly. What I will say is that the runners that answered our survey mostly chose the other option. So that's why they're not sort of coming up as weekly, and these aren't in time order, they're in alphabetical. No, just go with that. But the runners were saying that they had on-demand forecasts. So they had tooling in place that could create your current forecast at that point in time, almost press of a button type thing. So whenever you want it, whether it was monthly or at that date in the month or weekly. But you can see by far the majority are monthly, and that's probably a good place to start. At least review cycle them monthly. It's quite a lot of overhead though. So, and it also depends how good they are and how much review they need. If they're really poor, they need more regular review, but you can chip away at it. And this is something that you can work up to. This is something that you could start quarterly or even 6 months, and then you could break down the time slots. You don't have to rework. Okay, can you take me on to the next slide? So now, as part of our survey, Ashley mentioned it, we followed up with some of our runners and some of the interesting responses that we got. And we've got 3 fabulous people with us today to delve in a bit more on their stories. So we're going to kick off with the lovely Dieter. Over to you, Dieter.
Hey, everyone. I'm Dieter Mason. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I have been doing cloud FinOps since 2013 at companies like Google, Netflix, Intuit, and most recently Roku. At Roku, we spent about 100 million annually on Amazon Web Services, 20 million on GCP, and about 2 million on Azure. We use a driver-based in-house system that forecasts at the cloud SKU or stock keeping unit level about 4 years out. Let me walk you through how this looks like. Next slide, please. So the business defines business drivers, things like streaming hours, active accounts, ad revenue, and build versions. Build versions are for players' operating system builds. These are then forecasted by the business 4 years out, twice a quarter, on the first month of the quarter and the last month of the quarter. Our forecasting system maps tag combinations that uniquely identify workloads to business drivers. For example, a database may grow with active accounts, while a web service may grow with streaming hours. Our system generates cloud forecasts daily at 6:30 p.m. so that fresh forecasts are available the next morning. Cloud workload owners upload estimates about new workloads and usage optimizations whenever these become available. We review actual versus forecast with the finance team on a monthly basis. We follow up with the workload owners on any substantial over or underspend. Occasionally, we find certain drivers that are not a good fit for the actual growth where we need to adjust the forecasting algorithm. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here we see the architecture of our driver-based forecasting system. On the top left, we use a simple SQL client to input business drivers and new projects, as well as rate and usage optimization. The main table that maps drivers to cloud tags is relatively small, about 3,800 rows. On the bottom left, we ingest the AWS cost and usage report via Athena. In the middle, we see Apache Airflow, which is our batch processing system. Tasks within Airflow, so-called directed acyclic graphs, or DAGs for short, process the billing data and apply the drivers to individual workloads to build the cloud forecasts. The forecasts are then stored in Amazon Redshift, where we use Google Looker as our data visualization tool. The same forecasts also are written to our data lake, where we can run ad hoc queries using Apache Superset. We just started integrating GCP into the system and have no plans for Azure as our spend is still relatively low. That's all I have.
Thank you, Dieter. Appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and pass over to Brad next.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dieter. Love that content. Saw them in the chat. Everyone's taking screenshots. That was amazing diagram. Thanks everyone for having me today. Share a bit about what we're doing at PointClickCare. So very similar to Dieter, doing those 3-year-long forecasts. We're down at that resource group level, and we're focusing on driver-based forecasting along with dabbling with some machine learning. Next slide, please. I wanted to kind of focus on something a little bit different and give everyone a sense of what our journey and maturity and or maturation with forecasting has been. So we've got a little bit of a progression here from the cloudy days to the sunny future. So I'll take that next transition, please. And one more, I always like to start in year zero, which was really a very junior and part-time FinOps team. And we were focused on trend-based with what I call the very obvious drivers. And this was at the start of our migration. So our drivers were really, what were we migrating next? Focused on monthly and year to go forecasts for our total cloud spend. And yeah, our accuracy was poor and beyond two months, not very great. When we get into year one, we are like firmly embedded in Azure. We are running in the cloud, and we attempted our forecasting just as we did in the colo. And this was a really big learning experience for us. When we hit a budget crisis, when finances forecasts were different than FinOps' forecasts, and that put leadership at odds and caused some consternation. And really the heart of the problem there was we didn't understand who was spending what where, and we had no way to allocate those costs or to make those allocations visible to the business unit. Or the business units that needed them. And so forecasting here, started to become a little more nuanced. And we started adding what we called the puts and takes to those trends. And this was really tracking projects, cost savings initiatives, and other Azure service costs and trends. Perfect. Hitting year two, this is when we really hit our stride. We built a homegrown tool that supports product budgets and forecasts and allows teams to allocate resource costs to specific products, projects, services, components, budget owners, and cost centers. This really gives us all of that allocation and all that context that's unique to our organization so that we can get the right data to the right people. Forecasting continues to be driver-based and remains manual. However, we started dabbling with Meta's Prophet AI and adding that prediction-based data as part of those forecasts. Let's skip ahead. Perfect. Year three. This is ahead of us. We talk about FinOps Nirvana. This is perhaps our Nirvana state for forecasting here at PointClickCare. We are providing AI-generated predictions to budget owners so they have evidence-based starting lines for their forecasts. Budget owners then adjust with their planned variables, and our goal is to focus on per product forecasting accuracy as much as the top line. So this has been our journey, and I hope you're on either side of that or somewhere in the middle. Love to chat with you. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Brad. Really appreciate you sharing your story, and especially you coming from Azure. We love your perspective here. Thanks. Go ahead, pass over to Michelle.
Thanks, Brad, and thanks, Ashley. For me, I'll be sharing with you from my previous experience from the previous organization I was working with. It's a utility provider in Hong Kong, and we were on the run phase, and we do the forecasting mainly because of the fiscal annual budget, and also we revisit it on a monthly basis. We do it on the resource level and application level. So next slide, please. Thank you. So today I'll be sharing with you the different personas or roles that were involved in the forecasting. So the FinOps team, or we call them cloud team, overall FinOps, and they managed from a governance perspective, the budgeting and forecasting. We use a tool which is Cloud Health for the forecasting, and because in Cloud Health you can take a 12 months forecast, but we do export it in the Excel. That's the way the organization works. We find it more effective because not everyone have access to the Cloud Health. But then we have different teams involved. Once we have the forecast, we have system custodians who review what we shared to them. All the applications, normally some of them have like varied utilization, they change, they fluctuate every now and then. So it was very important that we get the system custodians input. We don't rely only on the tool. And of course, the system custodians also work closely with the business. They understand what is the upcoming workload, what are the new initiatives, if there's any marketing campaign that's happening. That's why system custodians are very important. Then we also have system owners, or in other terms, these are the business units or the product owners. They endorse our forecast, and of course, they provide any new requirements, and they're also accountable for seeking budget, and they are basically the budget owner. We also have other teams like finance and vendor management. Finance basically because the budget governance sits with finance team, and they track the cloud spend. In terms of vendor management, we get them involved if there are commitment-based discounts that's happening or any contractual negotiations. That's why it's also important to have all these teams part of the forecasting process. With the executive management, we report to them on a monthly governance cadence. We get them involved in terms of any decision making if there are teams that are over budget or their forecast is way below. And this is why we get the executive management involved. Next slide, please. So some of the lessons learned from our forecasting process, it's really a journey. We have to get everyone involved. As I mentioned, all those different personas needs to be involved, and they really need to understand the process. Although we have this amazing third-party vendor tool, but it's just a tool, it's just one source of input. We still need system custodians and system owners and all of these personas to be involved in the process. The other thing that we also learned from a 2 years or 3 years journey is we need to put a buffer in terms of our forecasting schedule. Even if we send it in advance, we still keep going in terms of getting reminders. And we also need to make sure we just don't send them an empty Excel spreadsheet, because it's very hard to get input from them. So it's very important that we give the forecast way in advance to them, and then they can review it. They can update it, they can confirm, or they can change it. Also, collaboration and engage. I think that's really the key thing when we do the forecasting. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Michelle. I have to give a shout out to Michelle because she's coming from us from Hong Kong. So it's very early in her morning. And she also was up, well, she'd be up at her morning time, my evening time. We were teaching the class last night. So she's been full on FinOps for the last 24 hours. So big shout out, Michelle, for that. Alison, what's next?
Thanks. So in the survey, we also asked, our final question is, what are your pain points? Because we want to direct the work that we're doing in the working group. So these are some of the key ones. I'm not going to go through them. I'm trying to catch up a couple of minutes on time, but come to the breakout, the forecasting breakout, where we're going to talk pain points and share your experiences if any of these resonate with you. But just before I move on, I'd like to do a heartfelt thanks to everybody in the working group, everybody that's provided insight and guidance, and most especially to Michelle, Brad, and Dieter. And I was going to say the same thing. It's almost midnight where Michelle is. So a big thank you, Michelle, because your story needed to be heard. On to the next one. Thanks, everybody.
JR here from the FinOps Foundation. Thank you for watching. Please go to FinOps.org if you want to get plugged into this amazing community. And of course, hit subscribe right here on YouTube to get all the future content. Hope to see you soon.